Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Furman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. Having just undertaken my own weight loss journey with a GLP-1 drug, I was fascinated to learn of the work of Dave Knapp and his organization On the Pen. Calling upon his personal experience with GLP-1, Dave recognized the need for a source of comprehensive information as well as advocacy for those challenged with obesity and type 2 diabetes. His website is onthepen.com, and he joins me this week to share his personal journey and book that answers many of the questions surrounding these drugs, Decoding GLP-1, a guide for friends and family of those on the pen. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus Dave Knapp. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Victor. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Dave, please share with us your personal journey and the emotional challenges you had to face.
Yeah, I always appreciate the chance to share my story because I think it echoes so many other stories that are out there for people who have lived with obesity. I started to experience, at least noticing that I was a little bit different than my siblings and my peers at a pretty young age, probably early adolescence. I noticed that I was a little heftier around the midsection than some of my friends were. And it was the first time I really started to notice that I had, something that was different about me. It wasn't completely abnormal because on either side of my family, I've got aunts and uncles and grandparents that have struggled with their weight, and some with obesity and type 2 diabetes as well. But in my immediate family, it was kind of rare. And so I felt a little bit like a fish out of water at a young age. And that just sort of progressed until high school, where I tried to always kind of watch what I eat, and I had people in my life too that were trying to encourage me to watch what I eat, and always reminding me that heart disease ran in the family and all those things that obesity can impact. All well-meaning things, but definitely that's a lot of pressure to feel at that age when you're already kind of feeling a little bit different. And as things sort of progressed, Victor, I discovered late in high school, this is around the 2002-2003 timeframe, I discovered the Atkins diet. And that will ring a bell with many of your listeners, I'm sure. And I embarked on, just kind of controlling my weight with that. And the thing about it, in hindsight, the bad thing about it was that it worked. It worked really well at that age. I was coupling it with a lot of strenuous exercise as well. Running miles and miles a day. I had, you can imagine what in that time frame, 2002, 2003, I had friends that were enrolling and enlisting in the military. And so I had friends that would run with me that were in the military to train. So I was doing a lot to control my weight, and it was working well. I was down, I think at my heaviest, I was around 220 pounds on a 5'11" frame. And I got down right around graduation time to my lowest weight of about 170 pounds. And I was able to keep that up until I wasn't. It just wasn't a long-term sustainable lifestyle, both in terms of how much I was exercising and the restriction of food that I was eating. And so really, to kind of encapsulate the next around 17 years of my life, I sort of chased that success with that Atkins diet for about 3 to 5 months out of every year. I would go hard on some form of a low carbohydrate diet, and I would usually be able to lose about 25 pounds. But on the upswing, I'd gain 30 or 35 pounds. And this ultimately led to age 37, where I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And at that time, I weighed in at 319 pounds. And so not only was I, not only was I, overweight and, having these early issues with, some elevated blood pressure, a little bit of high heart rate, but I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And it was at that moment that my doctor said, Dave, what do you want to do? At this point, I have 4 kids, and I really, really am, convinced in my mind that I'm going to do this with more hard work and grit and determination. And I was just going to buckle down. He said, well, if you want to stay off medication, there's basically one thing you can do, Dave. You can eat low carbohydrate. And so I explained that I had basically lived that lifestyle off and on and never been able to sustain it for long periods of time my entire adult life. But I was willing to, with this type 2 diabetes diagnosis, do whatever I could, grit my teeth, and do whatever I could to stay off medicine. And so for the next year, I embarked on a extremely restrictive low carbohydrate diet. I wore a continuous glucose monitor that fed back to my doctor so he could always see, if I was minding my P's and Q's. Of course, as a diabetic, if you eat carbohydrates, it's pretty noticeable when you are when you are having your blood glucose monitored in real time, 24 hours a day. And so I was doing everything I needed to do. But after 1 year, I sat in the doctor's office with a completely normal A1C, but my weight had only gone from 319 pounds to 312 pounds. This was, as you can imagine, Victor, quite I'm struggling to even find the word. I mean, I was defeated for sure, but that seems to come up short for what I felt. I was crushed by those results or lack thereof. And it was at that point that the doctor said, well, we've got 2 ways we can go with this. One, you're a candidate for bariatric surgery since you're non-responsive to this program. Or 2, there's basically a new class of medications that are starting to mimic hormonally what happens to people when they have bariatric surgery. And my curiosity was piqued. At 38 years old, I wasn't too keen on the idea of getting my my biology rearranged to fight the disease of obesity. I thought a medication sounded maybe preferable to that. And he said, what they've learned about these surgeries is that, everybody thinks that people lose weight because ultimately they're just eating less. They have a smaller stomach, et cetera. And he said, certainly that's part of it to begin with, but really what's happening is there's a restoration of these gut hormones that are responsible for things like satiety and helping your pancreas release insulin efficiently. And it's just restoring sort of this homeostasis. Even on the operating table, they're able to measure some of these hormones, and now they have medications that can mimic sort of some of those hormonal effects of bariatric surgery. And that, Victor, is when I was introduced to the idea of GLP-1 medications.
Your story is very similar to my story, except I'm a bit older, and GLP-1 came into my life much later. But I'm going to share this with you really quickly. As a kid, I grew up in a family where food was considered a reward. Mm-hmm. And even though I have a younger brother and sister who did not become obese, I became obese, especially at a young age. In 1973, I went into the Air Force, and I weighed about 200 pounds at the time, 5'9.5". And the training, I had to go through special training to lose weight so that I could pursue the career in the Air Force, or the enlistment that I had in the Air Force. I did that. I got down to the weight that they wanted me to be, and I was in the Air Force. And actually, I carried that weight pretty well until I got out of the Air Force in 1979. When I got out in 1979, I was weighing 170 pounds. As my life ensued, the weight came back to the extent that in 2010, at the age of 57, I was weighing close to 400 pounds. And I had an issue. I had to have stents put into my heart. I was blessed that I did not have diabetes, but I had to have stents put in my heart. And my cardiologist said to me, "You really need to get this weight off of you." And at that time, the only opportunity I had was to go under the bariatric surgery. And I had what they call a sleeve gastrectomy, where they basically remove most of your stomach and have a little sleeve-shaped stomach left over. I think you've probably heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that, and I started losing weight, and I feeling better and losing weight, and I got down to, I leveled off at about 240 pounds, and I just couldn't go beyond that, even though my weight, my food intake was much less, but I guess for some reason was stuck at that. And then I'll share later on my GLP-1 experience with you. But I will say, and very happily say, that after that experience, I'm now down to 170 pounds, the same weight I was when I left the Air Force in 1979, for which I am grateful.
Wow. That is an amazing story. And what I find most fascinating about what your whole story there, and there's probably a lot to unpack there, but you struggled with your weight all the way up until you got into the military. And then it was as if the physical demands of a military career were the only thing that could really keep your weight in check. And I think that really encapsulates, I think, the experience that a lot of people living with the disease of obesity, and I do say disease, I know some people will struggle with that, and I'd love to get into that topic more if you'd like to, but for purposes of this conversation, I think that is the big takeaway, because I think that's what people don't understand. I think that people living with overweight or obesity are always just lacking willpower, lacking the ability to just put the fork down, right? Put the fork down and move more. And if all things were created equal, that would be the case. But that's the big misconception about obesity. Some people simply have genetic factors that are working against them. They've been exposed to perhaps different toxins or different foods that have destroyed their gut microbiome. And really, when we talk about GLP-1, GLP-1 is not the name of a drug. GLP-1 is the name of a hormone that your body makes in response to taking in nutrients. And this is one of the hormones that becomes dysregulated in people living with disease like obesity and type 2 diabetes. So I just find that fascinating that it took that amount, a military career, that amount of physical activity for someone like you to be able to control your weight.
Absolutely. And I'll share my GLP-1 experience with you later on in the interview. What inspired you to write Decoding GLP-1 and share your personal experiences?
I get that question a lot, and really the answer to that question is the fact that I started to document my journey. I had documented different weight loss, pinpoints of my journey, so to speak, on YouTube, and I felt like, I'm not going to start this medication without knowing everything I can know about this medication. Like I said, I was a little hesitant to take any medication right away. Right. And so before I was going to inject myself with the medication, I was going to learn everything there was to learn. But at that time, back in the fall of 2022, there was just not a lot out there in terms of information about GLP-1 medications, what they were, where they came from, how they work in the body, et cetera. And to be honest with you, at that point, I didn't even buy into the idea that obesity was a disease. And so I just started to learn. And as I learned, I started to share on YouTube. And as I started to share on YouTube, a community started to develop around the YouTube channel. And so as that community grew, what I found is a lot of people would reach out to me and tell me that I was courageous or perhaps in their mind heroic for sharing that I was on a GLP-1. And I simply couldn't understand that sentiment. It did not track with me that how could somebody find that element of what I'm doing courageous? It's just naturally what I do. I like to, if I find something I believe in and am passionate about, I share about it. But what I quickly found is that so many people have so much shame and guilt wrapped up in living with the disease of obesity because culture, society, family, loved ones have placed on us this moral inadequacy that really cuts to the core, I think, of where people find their value and self-worth. And what I found is that my story was uncommon in that I was willing to share. And more commonly, people did not want to share that they were on medication. They did not want to share that they were getting treatment. And that really impacted me on a personal level. As a content creator, you have to kind of disassociate sometimes from comments and things people say, or things can be hurtful. But that's one of the things that really stuck out to me. I just read comment after comment, and I was personally impacted by the fact that so many people just felt like they couldn't share this part of their journey. And I thought, one of the things that I have the ability to do is articulate big concepts and boil them down into little bite-sized chunks that people can digest and understand. And I wanted to take everything that I was learning about GLP-1s by this point, by the time I wrote the book, which was last year, around this time I was writing the book, this time last year, the summertime of 2024. By that time, I had been introduced to some of the most renowned obesity specialists in the world. Because my YouTube channel had grown from, me sharing little stories about my injections to interviewing people, and the community had really grown, because really what we were doing was pioneering a whole genre of social media content that didn't exist prior to On the Pen. And so we gave it a name, On the Pen, which is, obviously a play on words, because these medications primarily come in injector pens. So we call it On the Pen. But the book itself was written to just simply be a Cliff's Notes to GLP-1, something that somebody could pass along to a loved one and say, hey, I'm on this medication, and, it's kind of awkward for me to talk about, but if you just read this book, you're going to get everything you need to know. There's a little bit about, what it's like to live with obesity, all the way to, sort of some of the ins and outs of the history of the medication and the future of these medications. And I just wanted it to be a tool that would open up conversations between people and their loved ones. And so they didn't feel like they had to hide under a rock anymore in terms of the treatment that they were seeking out for their obesity.
You touched upon this before, but can you break down for our listeners the science behind GLP-1 medications?
Yes, I'd love to. So as I mentioned before, GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. It's just a long sciencey word for a hormone that is produced in your gut and in your brain in response to nutrient intake. So these are often referred to as nutrient stimulated hormones. In other words, they're hormones that your body releases in response to nutrient intake. And the GLP-1 falls under a specific class of medication, not to lose people, but they're called incretin mimetics. And incretin hormones fall under this idea of nutrient stimulated hormones. And GLP-1 happens to be the most prominent. Now, there's some lore, and we shared this in the book a little bit. There's some lore around how they came up with GLP-1. I mean, obviously, the hormone in the body was discovered long ago. But in terms of mimicking it in a pharmaceutical drug, they were looking at Gila monster venom, which contained a peptide in it that, when isolated, brought down blood sugars in humans. And so they isolated this peptide. It's called exendin 4. And exendin 4 would later become the first GLP-1 to hit the market, called exenatide, and the brand name was Byetta. And simply what it did was it mimicked this GLP-1 hormone, this hormone that when you eat, your body makes it, and it helps you to feel full in your brain. It helps to regulate the insulin release in your pancreas. So it actually acts on the beta cells in your pancreas to say, hey, there's these types of nutrients, specifically glucose, and you need to release insulin now so that we can maintain our homeostasis. And what they had learned previously is that a lot of times this GLP-1 signaling, the GLP-1 levels in the body, were disrupted or dysregulated in the bodies of specifically type 2 diabetics. And in fact, one of the medications that came out before GLP-1 receptor agonists, or GLP-1 mimetics, were called DPP-4 inhibitors. And again, I'm saying a lot of sciencey things, so I don't want to lose anybody, but basically in your gut, you have bacteria, right? Everybody knows that. And there's byproducts of these bacteria, right? There's waste that they excrete. And one of the byproducts of some specific gut bacteria is this DPP-4 enzyme, which basically lives to destroy GLP-1 and similar hormones. And what they found is that in the guts, in the intestines, in the digestive tract of people living with type 2 diabetes, the gut bacteria that produces DPP-4 was orders of magnitude higher than it was in people with, let's say, a healthy gut. And so DPP-4 inhibitors came around as a treatment for type 2 diabetes to help your body preserve that natural GLP-1 that your body creates. And that sort of led to this discovery of GLP-1 analogs, which just have a much longer half-life, and they're sort of impervious. They can't be destroyed as easily by this DPP-4 enzyme in your gut. And so you get that signaling restored for satiation, for insulin release, and sort of this homeostasis is sort of brought back to that signaling between your gut and your brain.
Now, there can't be an hour that goes by without a commercial on television for Ozempic or Trulicity or Mounjaro or Victoza. Are there any differences between these?
Yeah, so as I talked earlier, the first GLP-1 receptor agonist was Byetta. That was the one that was sort of derived from this peptide in Gila monster venom. That evolved, right? That was a twice daily shot. And this all sort of relates to the half-life of the medication. So with Byetta, you have a GLP-1 receptor agonist that lasts a few hours. Well, the drug companies got to work and they say, how can we make this last longer so that people maybe only have to take it once a day? And then, the drug companies came up with a once a day shot. That was Victoza, which became the second GLP-1 to hit the market for type 2 diabetes. Then they realized there was actually some overlap and people were losing weight on these medications. And Victoza was approved then for obesity management, and it was called Saxenda. So that was the first once daily. And I don't want to go through the whole evolution of it, but then you get to your once weekly. That was Trulicity from Eli Lilly to manage diabetes. And then after Trulicity came another once weekly, a more powerful medication called Ozempic from Novo Nordisk. And Ozempic was then approved for obesity management, and it's called Wegovy. And that led to now targeting multiple incretin hormones, as we talked about earlier. You have the GLP-1, but there are multiple incretin hormones. And so Eli Lilly brought one to market that not only focuses on GLP-1 receptors, but also GIP, which is another incretin hormone, and has become a more even powerful drug yet for both controlling A1C, which is the marker that they determine type 2 diabetes and measure type 2 diabetes with, and in obesity. So it has a more powerful potential for weight loss as well.
My guest is Dave Knapp. His book is called Decoding GLP-1, a guide for friends and family of those on the pen. Dave, please share with our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and your work.
Yes. So the book is available on Amazon. If you just search On the Pen or Decoding GLP-1, you'll be able to find it there. But the gateway to sort of everything lives at our website, onthepen.com. And really where our focus is these days is we are creating a obesity medicine news platform. All the information that flows about these medications, you're either going to get it from the media, and it's basically the media puts out information about these medications that is designed for one of two people. It's either designed for doctors because it came from maybe clinical trials, or it's designed for investors because there's a lot of money to be made in treating obesity, a problem that affects an estimated 100 million people in the US alone. So there's investor news, and then there's doctor news, and we seek to bring patients the news that affects them and empowers them to have better conversations with their doctor. And so onthepen.com is the best gateway to get information about GLP-1 from the patient perspective. And we have a podcast, we have all the social media channels, and we have interviews with all of the obesity specialists around the country, CEOs of companies that are working on future medications. So anything you would need to learn more about these medications is going to be available there.
Thank you for your advocacy, sir. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
And we'll be back with more of Dave after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, Om Times Radio, IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization Their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on Om Times Radio. Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Dave Knapp. We're talking about his book, Decoding GLP-1, a guide for friends and family of those on the pen. Dave, what are some of the common myths and misconceptions surrounding these treatments?
Oh, I don't know that we have enough time to unpack all that, Victor, but you've seen the headlines: Ozempic face, Ozempic butt, Ozempic, you name it. There's a lot of sensational headlines out there, to be sure. But I think to be serious about it, because hopefully people understand that whenever you lose weight rapidly, there are a host of issues that can come with losing weight rapidly. And of course, those sort of side effects are associated with the medication, but oftentimes the side effects that people feel on these medications or may experience that become sensational headlines are more a result of rapid weight loss than anything else. But let's talk about maybe the biggest concern that people have with these medications that I think is completely warranted. So all GLP-1 medications or incretin mimetics come with a black box warning, which is a warning for medullary thyroid cancer. And so this is the one that I get the most from people who look at taking these medications. It's like, there's a warning about thyroid cancer on here. Should I be concerned? And we've interviewed doctors and specialists around the country. We've interviewed scientists and researchers. And here is the rub on the black box warning on GLP-1s. So when rodents are given an exorbitantly high amount of these medications, they have had rodents in rodent models. They've seen a specific type of thyroid cancer called medullary thyroid cancer. And so what they've seen is an increase. And so they put that warning on the medication because they've seen it in rodents. It has yet to be seen or shown in these medications that it actually causes this same thing in humans. A couple of really great studies have been done in the recent past, including one just a couple of weeks ago that came out. And forgive me, I don't have it in front of me, but you can look it up. You can find it at obesity.news, which is our Substack. We do articles on this stuff all the time, but type obesity.news into your browser and use the search tool. But basically what they've done is they've done post-marketing studies. So everybody knows about clinical trials. You have a phase 1, which is usually in animals. And then if it's safe, they'll move it to phase 2, phase 3, and then it's approved. But phase 4 trials are less talked about. And these are the studies that they look at using electronic medical records. So they're able to aggregate data from millions and millions of patients and cross-reference data about patients who are on GLP-1s versus patients who are not, and basically say, is there an increased risk of medullary thyroid cancer? And they've looked specifically at diabetics, and the most recent study was looking at diabetics who were taking a GLP-1 receptor agonist versus any other of the frontline treatments for diabetes. And there was, after, I believe it was they looked at a 4-year window, there was no increased risk over any other diabetes medication for developing medullary thyroid cancer than with the GLP-1 receptor agonist versus any other diabetes medication. And so that was a really long study, and it was looking at millions of patients. And so you're hard pressed to come up with better data than that in a post-marketing study. And so it's yet to be shown or proven that this exists in humans the way that it does in mice. But I think that's the biggest one that people sort of flinch when they see that black box warning. But it's good to put it in perspective of what we've actually seen in the real world.
There was a point when there were news reports of shortages of GLP-1 medications.
Yeah, obviously, as one can imagine, when you have a problem facing the United States, and actually obesity has become a global problem, the demand for these drugs, because of their effectiveness, is exponential, and people are willing to pay a very high price tag to get these medications. So even though for obesity, there's a very low insurance adoption rate as of current, people are willing to pay the sticker price to get effective treatment. And because that's the case, these medications have been in shortage because the drug manufacturers have been unable to keep up with demand. Novo Nordisk had the first really effective obesity drug when we talk about Saxenda. But Saxenda, I believe, was around 9% body weight loss over the clinical trial. And that was a game changer. But Wegovy, which is the obesity version of Ozempic, hit the market at almost 16%, 15% and change weight loss over 68 weeks. That is an exponentially larger jump from Saxenda even. And then when tirzepatide, Mounjaro, and Zepbound hit the market, it got all the way up to 22%. So they become very effective medications for treating obesity. And you've basically got two companies that make them. You have Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly. Now, both have scrambled to increase their manufacturing capacity. In fact, last year, at the end of the year, a deal was consummated between Novo Nordisk, or Novo Holdings, the parent company, which is one of the largest companies in the world, and a company called Catalent, which was once one of the largest generics manufacturer in the world. And Novo Nordisk acquired them and acquired all their finish and fill capacity to be able to convert that basically to GLP-1 manufacturing. Eli Lilly, for their part of it, have invested almost $30 billion in the last 5 years in expanding manufacturing capacity in these drugs in the United States. So they have scrambled to increase capacity to meet demand, and only recently have they really been able to catch up. So these were very hard to find. It actually impacted my own journey early on. There's a very specific titration process to starting these medications and getting up to the highest dose, which is the most effective dose in the clinical trials. And I had to skip several of them because they just weren't anywhere to be found during the early days of being on these medications.
How may patients and their families best navigate this complex world of GLP-1 medications?
Well, it obviously starts with great open conversations with your medical provider. These providers are becoming more aware and more educated on the topic of GLP-1 medications, certainly much more so than 2 years ago or 3 years ago when we started making content about this. So start with your primary care doctor. And I would really encourage folks, if your primary care doctor has reservations about these medications, try to speak to an obesity specialist, right? Because they're certainly going to be well versed in all of the areas of not only how these medications work, how they might benefit you, but also the insurance side of it. Because again, obtaining these medications is extremely expensive, especially if you're taking them for obesity management. Diabetes has a great adoption rate from the insurance company. So if you have diabetes, if you have the good fortune of being a type 2 diabetic like myself, they're rather easy to get through commercial insurance. But if you're treating obesity with them, as I mentioned earlier, the insurance adoption rates are terrible on obesity medicine right now. And we're working on that and working with organizations and working on Capitol Hill to change that. But start with your primary care. If they're not open to it or uneducated on this topic, speak to an obesity specialist. And honestly, going to onthepen.com, going to obesity.news, one of our resources out there, we talk all the time about different ways that you can get these medications covered. Manufacturer savings cards are a big topic of conversations because if your insurance doesn't cover, these drug companies provide a way for you to get them more affordably. You have a list price, and then they'll have a savings card that'll bring that list price down almost in half. There are direct options now through both Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk through their own pharmacies to do a cash pay version that circumvents the insurance altogether, which allows you to get these medications for less money than the sticker price. And so there are options out there, and we cover all of that at On the Pen. It's a huge topic that we cover.
Without mentioning any names, there are many organizations, companies that you see advertising on television that are offering a free consultation by phone to determine your need and then issuing these medications to you under their brand. Are these reliable?
Yeah, so I believe you're speaking about telehealth companies, right? Telehealth companies, which would essentially provide a stable of providers that they'll connect you with, that you can visit for an appointment and get these medications prescribed when medically necessary. I would say buyer beware always applies, right? Not all of these companies are going to be created equal. There, you want to do your homework and your due diligence on what company you're working with, because as we alluded to the idea of shortages earlier, this sort of spawned this whole industry of what's called compounded medications. In other words, when a drug is in shortage, patents sort of go by the wayside for a little bit, and generics, I'm using the term loosely, but copies of these medications are allowed to be made by pharmacies that hold the proper designation. Now, that has spawned a whole industry of basically knockoff versions of these medications that are sold and prescribed by these telehealth companies. So understanding the differences between both branded medications and compounded medications are very important, a topic that we cover in the book. It's a topic that we cover online quite frequently. Basically, they're not FDA regulated when they're compounded. These compound pharmacies have FDA oversight to some degree, but these are going to be copies that are made in times of shortage. Now that the shortage is over, things have moved to this idea of a personalized medication, sort of a legal loophole that allows them to continue to offer these at scale. But definitely it's a buyer beware situation, and you want to follow good people online, good resources like On the Pen, where we can point you to reputable organizations that can help you get access to safe medication.
In your book, you share how well-intended family and friends may actually say things to those using GLP-1 that are inappropriate. Please share some examples of this and how we can address the stigma surrounding obesity and diabetes.
I appreciate the question, because I think this is one of the most universal experiences that people living with obesity have. And that's these people in our lives, whether well-intentioned or malicious intent. We hear things, and things are said to us about our weight or about the way that we try to manage our weight. And even well-meaning comments, for example, like, hey, you're looking good. Have you lost weight? Oftentimes, somebody living with obesity hears that, and for some, they might find it and take that for what it's worth. Hey, I guess I'm looking good. That's great. That makes me feel good. But for many others, myself included, when I hear that, I start to consciously or subconsciously ascribe my value with that person being based upon how my physical appearance looks. And that can drive all sorts of behaviors, because thoughts lead to behaviors. And when these kind of ideas of our self-worth get wrapped up in our weight or the size of pants or shirt that we wear, it can be a very dangerous and slippery slope and lead to, some behaviors that may not be great for that person. So I would always, one of the things that we do in our book is towards the back side of it. We give some ideas about how you might start a conversation with somebody that you love about being on a weight loss journey, and some of the things that you can do to start that conversation. But also conversely, on the other side of it, if you love someone who may benefit from a GLP-1, or you just love someone who lives with obesity and want to understand them more, there's some tips for how to support them and how to avoid comments about their appearance, how to acknowledge the complexity of obesity as a disease and not a choice that somebody has chosen for themselves. Offer support without judgment or advice. So there's some good tips and tricks towards the back of just knowing how to maybe gently approach those conversations in a way that is not going to be harmful for the person that you love.
In the beginning, I started sharing my personal journey, and I had mentioned that in 2010, I had a sleeve gastrectomy, and I eventually settled down to a weight of about 240 pounds, which was still too heavy for my physical size of 5'9.5". I do have a wide frame. In 2024, my orthopedic surgeon said, it's time to replace your left knee. Mm-hmm. And I was having a great deal of difficulty walking, couldn't navigate steps for more than a couple of steps. And in preparation for that, he worked with my primary physician, prescribing me one of the GLP-1 drugs. And by the time I had the surgery in September, I had actually lost 25 pounds. And subsequent to the surgery, staying on the GLP-1, I am now down to 170 pounds. And remember, this journey in the second part of my life started at 400 pounds. So I had lost a tremendous amount of weight. I'm grateful for this because at 72 years of age right now, my energy level is like through the roof. And I can go out and do things that I hadn't been able to do in years. I can run. I can do many, many things. By the way, if anyone else has a knee replacement, if you want to run, talk to your doctor first. I'm not going to say go out and run right away. But in my case, I can, and I feel very blessed in that way. And I'm just grateful for the entire process. The one hitch for me was that when the prescription, I'm on Medicare, I've been on Medicare for several years. When the prescription was issued, Medicare and my supplemental insurance covered it until January of this year. And then they said because I didn't have diabetes, they couldn't cover me anymore. So I was actually paying out of pocket on a monthly basis for this. And as you alluded to, the expense on this can be rather extensive. I find that I truly want to do that. Now that I'm at my settled weight of 170, I'm having another appointment with my primary at the end of this month to see whether or not he thinks I should continue. And we'll talk about that in our next segment. But I'm very grateful for everything that happened in this process.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. I'm glad you're very fortunate being on Medicare to have gotten coverage for these GLP-1 medications without a type 2 diabetes diagnosis, especially given that you've been taking them for some time. Because going back, that's the whole thing about Medicare is what people don't understand is that it's actually illegal. I'm not saying that wrong. It's illegal. It's against the law for Medicare to cover obesity medicine. Now, this stems back to some legislation that was designed to protect the elderly population from previous generations of obesity medications that were stimulants. Obviously, the older population is at risk for more, typically comorbidities associated with the heart. And they didn't want to go around feeding a bunch of elderly folks who were on beta blockers and blood pressure medication with things that were going to amp their heart rate up. And so it's old archaic legislation that pre-existed GLP-1 treatments. And so what we're working on right now at On the Pen as part of our advocacy push is working with organizations to get that legislation changed. That would be, it's now introduced in the House and the Senate as a bill called the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act. And part of this legislation would change the Medicare approach to obesity management and open up the opportunity for weight loss medications to be covered. But you were very fortunate to be one who got that coverage through Medicare supplementary plans.
Absolutely. My guest is Dave Knapp. We'll be back with more after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hey, Dad, your prescription will be ready in just a minute. Hey, Dad, your laundry will be ready in just a minute. Dad, your lunch will be ready in just a minute.
Hey, honey, why don't you take a minute? When you help care for a loved one, you give them as much time as you can, making sure they're safe and comfortable. But it's just as important that you take some time for yourself. At AARP, we can help with information and useful tips on how you can maintain a healthy life balance, care for your own physical and mental well-being, and manage the challenges of caring for a loved one. Because the better care you take of yourself, the better care you can provide for your loved one.
Thanks, Dad.
Thank you. You're there for them. We're here for you. Find free care guides to support you and your loved one at aarp.org/caregiving. That's aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it, Last week she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for inspired conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Dave Knapp. We've been talking about his book, Decoding GLP-1, a guide for friends and family of those on the pen. Dave, do people taking these medicines require constant maintenance even after their weight loss goal is achieved?
It's a great question, and one that many people weigh out before they start these medications. So the first thing that I think that we have to understand is that obesity is a chronic relapsing disease. So if you've ever lived with obesity and tried to treat it with, let's just use the word that gets thrown around a lot, the natural way, right? Most of us have lived that experience where we have gone down and gone up and gone down and gone up and gone down and gone up and gone down. Very few people have ever gone down, or very few people are able to go down and stay down for their whole entire life, because those living with obesity, including, some of the metabolic dysfunction that goes along with that, some of the dysregulation of these hormones, if you stop treating it, you stop getting the advantages of treating it, much similar to the way that you would treat high blood pressure. Most people don't expect to take a blood pressure medication, get their blood pressure down, and say, okay, we're good, we're coming off of it. Obesity medicines are no different because it is a chronic relapsing disease. And the clinical trials for both semaglutide, the SELECT trials, the SURMOUNT trials for tirzepatide, these are the main two drugs that are out there right now, both have pretty good clinical evidence that once the medication is stopped, the benefit goes away and the weight does come back. Not all the weight in all the cases, but for most people, going off the treatment will experience some form of weight regain. A maintenance dose is typically what the goal is when people get to a goal weight and they're done with their losing weight. They want to be able to then maintain that weight loss with the lowest amount of medication possible. And that's really going to be a back and forth with you and your provider to try to find what is that ideal dose. Now, for some of the people in the community, that may mean taking the same dose they're on today less frequently. So for some people, that may be appealing because then you don't have to buy as much medication. For others, that may be just reducing the dose. Maybe you're on 5 milligrams now and you're still losing a little bit of weight. You want to slow the weight loss down. You move down to 2.5 milligrams. That typically seems to be the track that people in the community follow. But the data definitely does show us that there is a pretty significant amount of weight regain when the treatment is removed.
What are your thoughts on the future of GLP-1 research and its potential impact?
It's one of the questions, Victor, that I love answering the most. I really am hopeful for the future of obesity medication because, as we talked about early on in our discussion, GLP-1 is one of many incretin hormones. And now what they're doing with these future medications in early stage and some in late stage clinical trials is they're combining these hormones. So where we had, again, the early stage GLP-1s, and then when Mounjaro, tirzepatide, Zepbound. Those are all interchangeable, right? Tirzepatide, the active ingredient in Mounjaro, the diabetes medication. Tirzepatide, the active ingredient in Zepbound, the obesity medicine. They targeted two hormones. Now, Eli Lilly's next project that they'll release in a once weekly shot is called retatrutide. And retatrutide is a GLP-1 hormone agonist. It's a GIP hormone agonist, and it's a glucagon hormone agonist. And so you've got three targeted there. And what early stage clinical trials, they're showing us everything from best in class weight loss, 25+% weight loss over 72 weeks. Those were some of the earlier clinical trials, predicted to be about between 25 and 30 when that data drops later this year. Perhaps that data drops late next year or early next year. I can't remember the exact timeline, but soon that data drops. Expected to be between 25 and 30% weight loss. It eviscerates liver fat. It reverses liver fibrosis. It's being shown to shrink tumors. There's all sorts of data that will be coming fast and furious. And so targeting multiple hormones, because there's likely dysregulation in many hormones where there's dysregulation with one. If you're talking about a gut that's out of whack and out of balance, the future of these medications is bright. I think it's really going to change the way that we look at things like bariatric surgery and medicine. You're going to see a blend of two. One of the things I'm most excited about is a company called Fractal Health. And we've interviewed their CEO on the pen, but they've been looking at more of like root cause. Why does your body become dysregulated in GLP-1? Why does the nutrient sensing get dysregulated? And so they actually have like minor outpatient endoscopic procedures that perform like a small ablation on the surface of your gut lining, and it helps to restore the sensitivity to the nutrients that you take. And so your endogenous or naturally occurring hormones are rebalanced and reset. And so they're looking at trials where they get people down to their ideal weight with a drug like tirzepatide or semaglutide. And then they have this procedure done, and then they maintain their weight loss with that procedure instead of more medication. And so I'm just very, very encouraged. The more I learn, the more I believe that we will see, perhaps in my lifetime, this idea of disease as a very treatable, curable, preventable disease, and all of the cascading comorbidities that go along with it, whether we're talking about heart health, cardiac health, whether we're talking about cancer, there are 13 different cancers associated with obesity alone. Imagine if we can get to the bottom of this obesity problem. We solve a lot of the cancer problems that we have. We solve a lot of the heart issues that we have. And so while people look at these medications and the current price tag of them and say, this is going to bankrupt our healthcare system, I look at it and say, these medications are going to save our healthcare system.
How may individuals and organizations support GLP-1 advocacy and education efforts?
There are a whole host of them out there that support the advocacy for these, and things like the Treat and Reduce Obesity Act we talked about before. I would point to a couple of them. The first would be the Obesity Action Coalition. Now, this is a sort of like a trade organization, is how it operates. They do like industry trade shows, and they have, some pharmaceutical backing, et cetera. But it's really designed to be patient centric. I'll be actually attending a Your Weight Matters conference just next week in Washington, D.C., and people will be learning how to, talk to their representatives and advocate for obesity treatment. So the Obesity Action Coalition is one, and the Obesity Medicine Association would be another one that I would point people in the direction of. Just some great advocacy groups helping to rewrite the narrative about obesity in this country and helping people get access to care.
What would you like readers to take away from Decoding GLP-1?
I would just like to see more people feeling like they can have an intelligent conversation with a loved one, to educate them, and to just have a more open relationship. At the end of the day, this book wasn't designed to do the work of getting people to understand everything there is to understand about these medications. It was designed as a conversation starter to allow people to have better conversations with the people they love in their life, so that they didn't feel like they had to hide this part of their life. Now, imagine, Victor, being somebody who had gone from 400 pounds to 170 pounds and never saying a word about how you did it to your mom, to your dad, to your even some folks in the community don't share with their spouse that they're on these medications. So imagine the shame that is wrapped up in living with obesity for somebody who is not sharing with their spouse that they're on a medication to treat their disease. My hope and prayer for this book is that it opens up conversations for people to just have better conversations with their loved ones.
Absolutely. My guest, Dave Knapp, his book, Decoding GLP-1, A Guide for Friends and Family of Those on the Pen. Dave, one more time, please share with our listeners where they can get your wonderful book and find out more about you and your organization.
Thank you, Victor. OnThePen.com is the gateway to all the things, whether you're looking for social media connection, whether you're looking for a podcast. If you're looking for news, like a newsletter, a lot of people just like, hey, I don't like to watch videos, but I do like to read. If that is more what you prefer, we have a new domain called obesity.news. So people are used to typing in .com, but if you just type in your browser, obesity.news, it's going to take you to our Substack, which is what our newsletter is. And so you just put your email in, you'll sign up there, and directly to your inbox, just about every day, you're going to get a new update on virtually every topic that we talked about today and then some.
Dave, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this amazing and valuable information with our listeners.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Victor.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.